webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anke. I hope you can hear me well. Yes. So yes, hi everyone. Really glad to meet you all online during this event. My name is Tommy Kalmels. I work as a regional program and policy assistant within IOM regional office in Brussels. And it's really a pleasure to be part of this webinar that will focus on the results of the project UCare. But just before we dive into the content of this event, and Anke will guide you through the results of this project, I just wanted to say a few words of thanks before we start this presentation. So first, I just wanted to thank, of course, the European Commission for the continuous support to guarantee the rights of migrant children in migration, but also to advance their protection in Europe. I also wanted to thank on this occasion our partners, so Plexorg Vlaanderen and Arcis as well, for the joint work together with IOM to make UCare a reality today. And finally, I wanted to thank as well the UCare Project team and the IOM country offices in Belgium, Germany, and Greece for their coordination and really hard work in implementing this project with great success, I think. So I think it's really timely, and it's also a very good opportunity because, as you might know, we celebrated yesterday the World Children's Day on 20th of November. So this is really an important day to mark the anniversary of both the Declaration and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So I think we also have together this opportunity to advocate, promote, and celebrate the rights of the child, and to try to see how all together we can translate this into dialogue and concrete actions that will build a better world for migrant children as well. So just a few data to start and to also kickstart the discussion. But migrant children, they represent a significant and growing percentage of the migrant population worldwide. Anke will touch upon that a bit later on during the session. But just to say that they embark on a broad range of different type of migration, so much of which have also gender dimension. As highlighted in IOM's World Migration Report, for 2022, there were 41 million international migrants under the age of 18, which amounts to almost 15% of the world migrants population. So this is a reality with a lot of different implications, including on social, economic, cultural, psychological well-being, especially for those unaccompanied or separated. So I think this is why I think it's also very timely and very important further to the commitment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to leave no one behind. So we, IOM, remain committed to support all the efforts that aim at ensuring that migrant children are not left behind as well. So I think indeed an initiative such as UCare is a very good example of this type of intervention. And we really hope that, I mean, you first, but also, I mean, further cascading down the good, I mean, the lessons learned from this project, that also practitioners, policymakers, academia, civil society, and more specifically migrant children will benefit from the project tools and the results as well that will be presented today. So on behalf of the Migrant Protection and Assistance at the regional office in Brussels, I would like to wish you a very good webinar and a good session. So thank you very much. Anke, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Tommy, again for your kind words. And also from my side, I would like to thank indeed the donor, our partners, of course, in helping us developing the UCare tools, and also the regional office for their continuous support to the UCare project. So my name is Anke van der Velde. I am the project manager of the Unaccompanied Children in Alternative Residence, or also called the UCare Project. And I'm here with Eileen, the project assistant of UCare. And today we're going to present you of course, the UCare tools, the UCare results, but we'll also touch globally on alternative care options for unaccompanied migrant children. And indeed, we're of course celebrating yesterday's World Children's Day, but why do we actually focus on unaccompanied migrant children in today's webinar? Well, first of all, unaccompanied migrant children, they are children, so they are below the age of 18. And we know that this brings some vulnerabilities. Moreover, these are children that are on the move. And so we know that this brings, again, additional vulnerabilities. I see that some people are waiting in the lobby. Being on the move, of course, brings additional vulnerabilities. And finally, these are children that are unaccompanied. So these are children who have been separated from both parents and other relatives and are actually not being cared for by an adult who by law or by custom is responsible for doing so. And just definition wise, I would like to emphasize the difference with separated children. And these are children who also have been separated from both their parents or from their previous legal or customary primary caregiver, but not necessarily from other relatives. So these may include children that are accompanied by other adult family members. We also know that children who lack adult care and supervision are at a heightened risk of exploitation, violence, and abuse. So these three aspects make UMC a more vulnerable group, and it also makes us want to emphasize this target group in today's webinar. Like I said, being a UMC brings extra vulnerabilities. We are now diving deeper in some of those vulnerabilities. Several organizations have identified a number of protection gaps in the treatment of UMC, including the fact that they face greater risks of sexual exploitation and abuse, military recruitment, child labor, detention, and in many countries, they're also routinely denied entry or even detained by border or immigration officials. And in other cases, they're admitted but are denied access to asylum procedures, or their asylum claims are not handled in an age and gender sensitive manner. We also see that the threats that they face need to be addressed, definitely because we see, and we will discuss this in later slides, that their number is really increasing. These children do not necessarily have access to education or adequate education. They are in reception centers where sometimes there are quite bad circumstances, or they are being cared for by staff that are not trained to care for them. Of course, everything linked to discrimination, xenophobia, social exclusion, trauma as well, PTSD, psychological difficulties, etc. But today I would also like to emphasize the case of disappearances, because yesterday one of the Belgian stakeholders released figures on disappearances of migrant children, and the latest numbers of missing migrant children in Europe revealed that between 2018 and 2020, 18,000 children in migration went missing in Europe. Yeah, we see that there's really a need to reduce the number of children stuck at border areas in overcrowded camps or living in the streets, where they often lack sufficient food or accommodation or legal assistance, because these are conditions that may lead to these children disappearing from the camps or from detained or from the streets, etc. So now that we had a look at the vulnerabilities, I would like to touch upon the figures as well, because UMC is a very considerable group. We see that these are older statistics than the World Migration Report, but here you can see it quite nicely. So 1 in 8 international migrants is actually a child, and we see that not only the amount of international migrants are growing, but also the amount of child migrants are growing. And here on this slide, you have an overview of the proportion of child migrants in the migrant population in the different host regions. So you can clearly see that actually in a lot of regions, there are child migrants, there are child refugees, there are UMC, and indeed 1 in 8 is a child, and more or less the same for young migrants, so above the age of 18. And when we have a look at the countries of origin, we see that just 2 countries account for nearly half of all child refugees in the world. This, of course, links to both accompanied and unaccompanied children, but we see that the Syrian Arab Republic and Afghanistan are the largest countries of origin, followed by South Sudan, Myanmar, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Sudan, Somalia, and so on. These are global figures. When we check for the asylum applications by UMC in Europe, we actually see very similar results. These are the most recent statistics that I could find. So in 2021, over 23,000 applications for international protection were lodged by unaccompanied minors in the EU countries. And this is actually the most since 2017. We see that, let's say, the overall, like the percentage remains quite stable at around 4% of all applicants for international protection, but we mostly see an increase in absolute number. I would like to make a side note with that. There are obviously limitations to this data because there's no comprehensive data on arrivals in Europe. There's also irregular routes and smuggling networks where we don't really have a view on, and know that not every UMC in Europe lodge an application for international protection. So this is probably a huge underestimation of the amount of UMC that are currently in Europe. Okay, so we know about the vulnerabilities, we know the figures. Why do we now have to explore alternative care options? We actually see that the risks and vulnerabilities that I just discussed are often exacerbated when the children find themselves in inadequate conditions in overcrowded facilities, often with adult strangers, and often without adjusted services. Think about health, education, psychosocial support. Also think of staff members that are maybe not trained to take care for UMC. So we also talked about disappearances, and we see that the prevalence of child disappearances is actually higher in reception facilities than in appropriate alternative care systems. So mostly what happens is when there's a large influx of UMC is to accommodate them in institutions, shelters, detention centers, where they do not receive the care, attention, and services they need. it's basically not in the best interest of the child to put them there. And this morning, we had also someone talking about transit or making the comment about transit countries. And yeah, even there, it's a reflex to put children in overcrowded reception facilities that are not adjusted to them, because they will leave soon anyways. But we see that alternative care systems really increase the protective factors, really help to have the best interests of the child at heart. And it also enhances the integration process. So research in Europe dedicated to child protection to child protection outlines that family-based care and small-scale alternative care systems should be prioritized in line with the existing child protection standards and guidelines. Because researchers, but also practitioners, they tend to agree that family-based care is a better placement option for UMC, definitely in comparison to living alone or in those large-scale centers, because it offers them a context with increased protective factors. So research have shown that UMC tend to integrate better in foster families. They had actually better health outcomes, better mental health outcomes. They performed better at school. They were also less isolated, less lonely. They participated more in group activities, and they also considered themselves actually more successful in making friends. And there was a European Commission proposal for a Council recommendation establishing the European Child Guarantee, which eventually was established last year. And we see that it outlines the strong correlation between social exclusion of children and the lack of access to key services. So indeed, alternative care options, they help to the integration process, the inclusion of UMC in society, and we see that this correlates to a better access to key services. We indeed see that those that experience disadvantages will also be more likely to face barriers in accessing key services that foster their emotional, social, cognitive development, etc. And I think what is definitely worth mentioning is that exploring alternative care options will help to better cover the needs of UMC. We know that UMC is not a homogeneous group. Every UMC have their own wishes, their own needs, their own expectations. And by establishing alternative care options, or more than only being in a reception facility, it will help to really cover the needs of each UMC. I want to emphasize that not all UMC want to be in alternative care options. We, in the framework of the UCare project, we actually interviewed quite some UMC, and some were actually very happy in reception facilities where there were trained staff, where they had very good access to education, to language classes, where they could be with friends. But this is not always the case, and there are quite some UMC that need this familiar context, that need this extra protection in the form of a family, for example. So by exploring alternative care options, you allow yourself as a social worker to better have the best interests of the child at heart. Now, what is alternative care? So I found a definition in the UN guidelines on alternative care of children. And alternative care is defined as where the child's own family is unable, even with appropriate support, to provide adequate care for the child, or where the own family abandons or relinquishes the child. And in those cases, the state is responsible for protecting the rights of the child and ensuring appropriate alternative care with or through competent local authorities and duly authorized civil society organizations. It is the role of the state, through its competent authorities, to ensure the supervision of the safety, well-being, and development of any child placed in alternative care and the regular review of the appropriateness of the care arrangement provided. Okay, now there are two categories of alternative care, family-based care on the one hand and residential care on the other. The latter, residential care, is provided in any non-family-based group setting with paid or unpaid staff, where some children live and receive care and are placed by order of a competent authority. Family-based care speaks for itself, but there are some subcategories here as well. So first of all, there's kinship care. This is family-based care within the child's extended family or with close friends of the family known to the child. So a concrete example could be that, for example, the UMC's brother arrived in the country some years ago, maybe themselves as a UMC, and they have now reached the age of majority, and after screening, they are chosen to be competent to take care of their younger brother, for example. Could also be an uncle or an aunt or a grandfather that is here. So this is what we mean with kinship care. Foster care is different because these are children that are also placed by a competent authority in the domestic environment of a family other than the children's own family. And they have been selected, qualified, approved, and also supervised for providing such care. And then the last category, so there are other forms of family-based care, and one example is, for example, guardianship care. Also a side note here that kinship carers in Belgium, definitely, they also receive the same support as foster carers. So they are also being guided by the competent foster care agency here in Belgium. And it's not always because there are family members here that they're selected to be competent to take care of the UMC. So it could be that, the best interest of the child is always at the center. So it could be that it's better to not place the child with kinship carers, but rather with a foster care family. Okay, and this brings us to our UCare project, because our UCare project basically has the aim to improve, and in some countries to establish, alternative care for unaccompanied migrant children. The UCare project started in January 2021 and is coming to an end of this month, in a few days. So it's our last days as UCare project team. The UCare project is funded by the European Union under the AMI funds, and it really had the intention, it had the focus on 3 countries, Belgium, Greece, and Germany. But we're happy to see that the lessons learned, the tools, our results are basically being disseminated in a lot of European countries, but also cross-regional. So we see that a lot of regions express their interest to learn more about alternative care options and to see how they can implement the UCare tools in their own region. We didn't do that alone as IOM. We had a partner organization that helped us with the implementation of the project. In Belgium, we had Pleegzorg Vlaanderen. They are the relevant foster care or family-based care agency in the Flemish region of Belgium. In Greece, we received support from ARSIS, which is an NGO that cares for UMC in Greece, both in relation to family-based care, but also semi-independent living and so on. In Germany, we mostly were implementing with the IOM team there, but we had a huge variety of stakeholders that helped us with the implementation of the prototypes. In Belgium, Greece, and Germany, we focused on alternative care, like I said, but the focus was a bit different in the three countries. So while in Belgium and Greece, we focused on family-based care, in Germany, we focused more on the transition to adulthood and how alternative care can support the transition to adulthood for UMC. So in Greece, we had to start a little bit, not from zero, but the family-based care in Greece wasn't, for unaccompanied migrant children, wasn't really established there. And furthermore, we see that in Greece, adoption is prioritized over foster care. So we noticed that a lot of the public in Greece didn't really know what foster care entailed. And then furthermore, there was no real system in place to offer family-based care for UMCs. And to already give you a spoiler of what happened in Greece, we're actually happy that together with the national authorities, we have included UMCs younger than 12 into the family-based or the foster care system. So they're now part of the National Registry for foster carers, which means that foster families can now choose to also foster unaccompanied minors below the age of 12. So that was quite a nice result that we attained in Greece. In Belgium, family-based care is more established. This week, for example, in Belgium is the week of the foster care. So it's all over the news, all over the radio. It's really, it's really a well-known concept in Belgium. But we noticed that that there needs to be more attention to culture. The culture of the foster families, but also the culture of the UMC. And we noticed that the pool of foster families do not always represent the families in the Belgian society. And in Belgium, we really focus on this entire culture-sensitive component of family-based care. Like I said, in Germany, we focused on transition to adulthood, and there we developed alternative care prototypes to support UMC in their transition to adulthood, but also to support authorities, organizations, social workers in establishing some easy tools to help with the transition to adulthood. So I'm going to now dive deeper in the needs that we have identified, the challenges that we have identified in each country, and also the results and the tools that we have developed. Like I said, in Belgium, we saw that the pool of foster families do not necessarily reflect the Belgian society. So we have a very diverse public, Brussels is I think one of the most diverse cities in the world. But when we looked at the foster families, we saw that they are mostly white foster families. And we saw that it didn't always allow us to meet the needs of the UMC. Because not only through research, but also through consultations that we had with the UMC, we see that for them, there's really an added value in sharing culture, in sharing religion, language, because for them, it ensures a kind of bonds between their home country and their new country. But it also helps to have a stable environment to promote their integration process. So some UMC, they really try to focus on, for example, their integration process, and they wanted to come home with a family where they share the same religion, where they share the same language. But on the other hand, we also talked to UMC that really wanted to be in a traditional white family, that wanted to actually not really break, but didn't want to speak the language, or at least wanted to learn the Dutch language, for example, faster by being in a traditional white family. There's also other reasons for UMC to not want to be in a family with a migration background. Could be linked to, for example, smuggling and trafficking, that it gives some fear. So what we wanted to actually do, or the needs that we actually saw, was that there's a big pool of UMC with different needs. And by enlarging the pool of foster families, we wanted to, enable better matching between the UMC and the foster family. We also noticed that our recruitment tools did not reach migrant communities. So when we talked to diaspora and migrant communities, they felt a sense of responsibility over the UMC, but they actually rarely were targeted by the standard recruitment tools that we use, like social media campaigns. So this is another challenge that we faced. Awareness raising, of course, as well, both with with families, but also with UMC. For example, there was a lot of fear with UMC that they would lose the connection with their biological parents, which we know is a very big deal for them. And there were some myths that they had about foster care, but the other way around as well. So a lot of families that registered to be a foster family for a UMC, but then were very surprised that there are not a lot of children UMC under the age of 13, 14, and that most of them are male and not girls, for example. So that was another challenge we faced. And we also noticed the need from carers and professionals to have really a culture-sensitive training on racism, on how to discuss taboo, how can you care in a culture-sensitive way. So these were the needs and the challenges that we have identified in Belgium. In Greece, we really saw the need to bring together all the actors that are involved in alternative care or in institutional care to discuss the possibility to install family-based care options for UMC. So what we did was really to bring together all policymakers, institutional and non-institutional care actors, and we brought them together by organizing regular meetings with them networking, by participating in events, and to basically advocate for establishing family-based care for UMC in Greece. Because, like I briefly mentioned before, the national system didn't allow for registration of UMC in Greece. And so it took a lot of advocacy to pilot a registration of children between the ages of 0 and 12. And this took a lot of consultation rounds. And we're happy to, like I spoke already in the beginning, we're happy that we were able to establish this in Greece. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, we really noticed that there is a need to inform and sensitize the public about the profile of UMC. So we really needed to develop tools, information leaflets, not only about the profile of UMC, but also about what foster care is, what it entails, what the difference is with adoption, and etc. So based on these needs and challenges, we developed some tools to support family-based care. The first one is a training toolkit, Caring for UMC, which basically builds further on a previous project that IOM led on, which is called Fostering Across Borders, FAB project, which was implemented in 2017 and 2018 in various European countries. And under this project, they had developed a very comprehensive training toolkit that allows social workers, but also volunteers, basically everybody that at some point in their career works with UMC, to get to know more about them, to get to know more about how to care for them, about the legal framework, and etc. This legal aspect that is incorporated in this training toolkit does mean that people using the toolkit would need to adapt it to their own local context. So that is what we did, for example, in Greece and Germany. We adapted the training toolkit to the Greek and German national context. We also developed like an information booklet about family-based care, but also some country of origin leaflets. For example, I think by now we have around 7 to 8 country of origin leaflets, which has some interesting information for social workers or foster families about the country of where the UMC comes from. So we have, for example, Syria, Somalia, Vietnam, Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc. Like I explained, under the Belgian stream of this project, we really felt the need to elaborate more on culture and on the aspect of culture and identity. And so to really complement this training toolkit, we developed a culture-sensitive toolbox. It talks about culture-sensitive care. It talks about breaking taboos, dealing with racism, about self-care as well. It really gives some tools to social workers, foster families, legal guardians, basically everybody that cares for UMC, to deal with racism, to make UMC more resilient, to help to reflect on ways to react to racism, to recognize racism, but also to open the discussion about certain taboos, or to ask yourself questions as a caregiver that can help you become more culture sensitive. And then lastly, we have recruitment guidelines, also culture sensitive. here the recruitment guidelines are, of course, more linked to recruiting foster families, but you could use these guidelines also to recruit other volunteers, like legal guardians, for example. And here we focus also on the key figure approach, which is a way for us to better reach migrant communities, because these key figures are important people in migrant communities or diaspora communities, and they help us to have one foot in the community. It helps us to relay information on foster care, on UMC, and the other way around. Except for that, we also discuss other recruitment methods in the guidelines. We also developed some informative videos. So there's the awareness raising or recruitment video. You can use them as both. We have them short and long. The short one is around 1.5 minutes. The long one is around 6 to 7 minutes. And our colleagues in Greece, to really raise awareness about UMC and foster care, they made a series of informative videos on UMC. It didn't take a lot of effort to develop those videos, but they were very effective in really providing information to the general public through a social media campaign. I will skip those videos, but we will be sharing the links in the chats. In Germany, we focus on transition to adulthood. So we really focus more on older UMCs, because generally we see that family-based care is a preferred option of younger UMCs. But we also wanted to have a look at the older UMCs, and we found out through consultations that, of course, this transition to adulthood is a particularly vulnerable phase in the lives of UMC, because it basically entails 3 transitions at the same time. So first of all, there's a transition from the home country to a new country. So we see that there's this transition in identity. What do I mean with that? Well, most UMC, they arrive 16, 17. So they're still transitioning here, and they're already being confronted to also becoming an adult. So getting new roles, new responsibilities, changes in relationships, etc. And on top of that, there's the third transition, which is basically for what we call aging out. And aging out for UMC refers to the loss of rights children experience when they turn 18. So it includes the fact that children become or remain undocumented on their 18th birthday. And turning 18 means losing access to essential support and services like healthcare, like specialized social workers, like a guardian. And of course, this has a lot of consequences for children and the lives of young people. It's linked to studying, it's linked to not being maybe able to continue work, getting a driver's license, etc. And so it also means that they lose the little respite that they may have from the full force of migration enforcement policies. And to explain a little bit better what I mean with these 3 transitions and these vulnerabilities that come with it, I would like to present to you a short video, but I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear the sounds. So please let me know if you can hear.
We can hear the sound.
So indeed, and when we actually had the consultations with social workers, with UMC, with care leavers, other experts, we saw that some needs linked to the video also came forward. So of course, there's a short amount of time available to prepare for independent living, and the termination of these youth welfare services, it often undoes the positive developments that were reached by the young persons in the past years. And it really puts them at a risk of marginality. There's also guardianship, which really plays a very important role. Also, the uncertain housing situation, we saw that in the video as well, that quite some UMC turned homeless. And also the social networks of care leavers are quite small and really limited to the youth welfare context. And based on this needs analysis, we developed a big guiding document for all organizations, city actors, IOM offices that are looking to strengthen the transition to adulthood approach. And we do that by also including a step-by-step guidance. So I think it's really worth taking a look at the document. I will discuss the 3 prototypes that we have developed very shortly here, but know that you can find more information in this guiding document. We will be sharing with you, of course, the link in the chat. Voilà, the first one is the holistic housing prototype. It really aims to provide a stable and secure housing environment for aged out UMC or care leavers. It avoids an abrupt termination of assistance upon reaching the age of majority. It really creates a framework for comprehensive transition support, and it helps to establish a secure housing environment through new planning alliances. So we really look at including a lot of different actors in planning for this holistic housing option. Here, with this prototype, we really try to avoid or reduce disruptions within the social network and within the integration process, because what we see is that when children, they have to leave the reception facility or whatever facility that they're in, mostly it's a break with even the environment, because some of the youngsters, they have to go to the city and they're used to living in another city. So this prototype helps to avoid these disruptions and this uncertain housing situation. And here I have a very graphic example of what I mean. So you can take this house quite literally. So for example, on the first floor, you would have an intercultural residential group, which hosts adolescents and young adults who are being prepared gradually to more independence in the context of a small residential group. So we see here, for example, high intensity of care and staffing ratio. On the second floor, we see those young adults who already display a higher degree of independence. So we see here low intensity of care and staffing ratio and no need for 24/7 support. And on the third floor, we see young adults who have high degree of independence and self-reliance, and where we see that care and support is only needed in special occasions. And you could even broaden it up by having a fourth floor with local students, for example, where you can also include a mixed match between the different groups. So you're really able to put a lot of young adults together, but still respecting their individual care needs. In this house, you would have a 24/7 integrated contact point, but you would also have like a one-stop shop, basically. Let's say a room in the house where the youth welfare office would be, the social welfare office, job center, housing company, but also like youth organizations or trauma counselors, and where those children or young adults in those different those different stages could actually know, okay, on Monday and Tuesday my youth welfare officer is there, and on Thursday and Friday the job center is there. So when I want to have a talk with the job center, I know on Thursday, I just knock on the door. I don't have to take a bus. I don't have to take a train. I don't have to call. I don't have to have someone with me coming because they're just inside my building. And I think this helps to reduce also these bureaucratic thresholds that UMC have to deal with. So it really takes into account the UMC and care leavers' different degrees of independence, and it really gives a gradual preparation to independence. What is interesting is that we work with a planning alliance and we work with stakeholders, like, for example, the private sector, private housing companies. So I think this is a more innovative approach of this care prototype. Having them all together in this house and creating synergies, it means also that the costs for accommodation and care can be kept quite low, and it also enables the young people to really stay as long as possible in a familiar environment with familiar people and familiar contact persons. So I think that's a very interesting point of this prototype. Another prototype is the self-advocacy prototype. Central here is the facilitation of an interest and self-advocacy network that provides both UMC, but also those that have already left care with a platform and a platform of support. It's basically a kind of peer-to-peer support, but there's always, let's say, one social worker that would lead on this self-advocacy group. And mostly we're thinking of like social workers that already have a good bond with the care leaver, because what we mostly see is that care leavers, because they have so many needs, because they have so many questions, they often call to their previous social worker. So these social workers are really overburdened, and there's really this need to like have continuous support. So having this self-advocacy network, they have this group of friends. So you really establish social networks, but you also have this link to a social worker that can help with the more difficult questions. So it's not like informal knowledge sharing, but it's also really helping with bureaucratic and more legal matters. And then there's the mentorship, which links with the point that I made on legal guardianship ending at 18. There are basically two possibilities in this prototype, or you have a guardian that becomes the mentor once the UMC turns 18. Of course, the relationship kind of changes, but the core remains the same. There's someone to support. There's this protective factor, But we actually see that a lot of guardians, they have around 40, 50 UMC under their care. So this is not always a possibility. Another possibility could then be this second approach, where you would have a mentor joining 1 year before the UMC turns 18, that kind of guides together with the guardian. There's clear role division, but then once the UMC turns 18, they still have this familiar person that could guide them with whatever question that they may have. So this is the third prototype. Like I said, the 3 prototypes are described in our document. And I think they're really low thresholds tools that you could implement in your own organization, or that you could advocate for with local authorities. I just would like to end with some lessons learned and recommendations from the UCare project. So like what we said before, diversify alternative care options, diversify your pool of foster families, as well as adapt, tailor, and design activities and solutions to the needs and wishes of UMC, so that we really put the needs and wishes of the UMC central. A whole of society approach. It's really important to engage diaspora, migrant communities, neighborhood actors, authorities, civil society, the general public, other care leavers when caring for UMC. Having a bottom-up approach where you focus on getting to know the needs of your target audience, where are the gaps, by consulting social workers, by consulting UMC. This will really allow you to develop and implement activities in a more efficient and effective way. Of course, also facilitate local initiatives that encourage active participation, because it really increases the social inclusion and it helps with the integration of the UMC. And we would recommend authorities to establish a transition period from 18 to 25 years of age to advocate for rights and better practices concerning aged out UMC. We notice that awareness raising is very important when it comes to alternative care, when it comes to caring for UMC. Also, not all volunteers, not all professionals that work with UMC are trained well. So it's definitely worth investing in training and capacity building, but also consider developing complementary thematic trainings based on the needs of the social workers. Culture-sensitive recruiting, very important, but it's definitely a full-time component within the recruitment. Have professional clinical supervision in place for professionals working in the field of foster care. So part of our training toolkit is also self-care. And when you want to build family-based care, note that you will also have to provide interpretation services, legal support, psychosocial support to really ensure a smooth integration into the family. So this is basically it from my side. I would like to thank you for joining, and please, when you have questions, let me know, put them in the chat, raise your hand, and you can always contact me, of course, if you would like more guidance or if you would like to ask more questions. We also put in the chat the links to our UCare tools. So you will also be able to find some interesting reports that we have developed throughout the project, aside from the tools. And you can also find our YouTube videos. Okay, and I see that there is, can you share with us the regulations in place in Belgium, Germany, and Greece? I will send it to you because that would lead me quite far and we're already a bit over time, but it's also quite well discussed in each of the reports. But I will send it to you, Valentina. So I don't know if there are any other questions. I see people typing. I don't know if it's a question or just like a thank you, bye. So I will give a couple of minutes. It's a thank you. You're welcome. So I think I will close off here. If you have other questions, please don't hesitate to write me. My email is there. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me to learn more about alternative care options. And I really hope that it inspires you to work with your local authorities or national authorities, to work with organizations to really strengthen their alternative care. Thank you and have a great evening or great morning for, I don't know where people are joining. So have a good day.